Hello and thank you for joining us today. My name is Olivia Buncher and I am the admissions coordinator for the Doctor of Pharmacy program, and I'll be sharing information with you today about becoming a strong applicant for our program. First, I'll discuss our application process, including the PharmCAS application and our specific requirements for the University of Minnesota. Then I'll move into how to become a competitive applicant, including our selection criteria, how your application will be reviewed by our admissions committee, and some tips for various parts of the application. So first, the application process. There are several steps in the application process that actually begin generally a couple of years before you actually apply for the program. The first is planning for and taking the prerequisite courses that are required for admission, planning for and taking the PCAT examination, filling out the PharmCAS application and submitting all of the required materials, and completing an admissions interview. Prerequisite courses are a list of courses that must be taken prior to entering our program. They can be in progress at the time that you are filling out your application and should be completed by the first day of the PharmD program if you are admitted. There are some requirements that must be met for a course to count as one of our prerequisites. It must be taken at a regionally accredited university, college, or community college, must be taken for at least 3 semester credits, completed with a grade of C- or better, and it can be satisfied by either AP examinations or through IB, PSEO, or college and the school's credit, depending on how it appears on a college transcript. This is a list of our required prerequisites. We require general biology, and that course must be taken with a lab. Microbiology does not require a lab, but it is recommended. We accept human or comparative anatomy and physiology, and we do recommend that that is taken with a lab, and we recommend human-focused courses over comparative courses. For human and anatomy and physiology specifically, you can either take 1 anatomy course and 1 physiology course, or 2 semesters of a combined anatomy and physiology course, which are usually labeled Anatomy 1 and Anatomy and Physiology 1 and Anatomy and Physiology 2. Or in some cases, universities offer a single semester course that covers the entire human body, both anatomy and physiology. And if you take one of those courses, it must be 4 or more credits. We also require an advanced biology course, which is typically genetics, cellular biology, molecular biology, or biochemistry. We require calculus, statistics, a full general and organic chemistry sequence, including 2 general chemistry courses with at least 1 lab and 2 organic chemistry courses with at least 1 lab. The way these courses are offered at different institutions basically determines how many labs you take. So if you're at a school that requires a lab for both general chemistry classes to get into organic chemistry classes, then you would end up taking 2 courses with 2 labs for general chemistry. We require 1 semester of physics, and that can be algebra or calculus based. And then we have several non-math and science prerequisites that can be fulfilled either by taking the individual classes or by getting a U.S. bachelor's degree. That includes 2 social or behavioral sciences courses, an advanced English composition or writing course, and an introductory communication class like interpersonal communication, public speaking, or group communication, any type of introductory communication that focuses on human interactions. We do offer guides for over 150 colleges and universities throughout the United States that show you the specific course numbers that meet these prerequisite requirements at that institution. So you'll see a link at the top of the screen that has all of those guides, and they're organized by state. If you are at a school that does not have a guide, we're also happy to do evaluations of your transcripts, and you'll find information on that same website about how to submit a request for a prerequisite evaluation. Next, we'll discuss the PCAT. The PCAT is a standardized test that's required for many pharmacy schools for their admissions process. It's an examination that has biology, chemistry, a quantitative section, reading, and writing. It is required for our application process for all applicants, and we do not have any minimum score required to be considered or to be admitted to our program. It does require advanced registration, generally about 2 months before the test date. There are several testing sessions offered throughout the year. The most common testing date would be the July window, and that's July of the year prior to starting pharmacy school. So this month there will be people taking the PCAT examination that are applying for fall 2019 admission. There are also dates throughout the rest of the fall semester and early into the spring semester. However, we do require that people take the exam no later than January for fall 2019 admission. And scores for the PCAT exam all get sent directly to PharmCAS at code 104, and then they share those scores with the schools that you're applying to. The PharmCAS application is a standardized common application that's used by over 150 pharmacy schools in the country. And basically it's a common application that allows you to enter your information once and have it sent to several schools. This year, the application is going to be opening next week. It's planned to open on July 18th. And again, this is basically, it's a full year process. So the application opens in July, and this is for people applying for next fall 2019. They do recommend that you use either Chrome or Firefox as your browser so that you don't run into any technical difficulties. So if you're using another browser and you have problems, that's usually the first thing that they recommend is trying one of those browsers. One thing that's really important to know about PharmCAS is that applications go through a verification process that can take up to 6 weeks. So you don't want to wait until the last minute. Historically, it's usually taken closer to 3 or 4 weeks for applications to get verified, but they do say that it can take up to 6, so it's important to plan ahead. We'll talk about deadlines in a minute here, but we recommend submitting the PharmCAS application at least 6 weeks prior to the final deadline that you're hoping to meet to allow time for that verification process. There is a link here where you can learn more about the different components of the PharmCAS application. So as I mentioned, it's kind of a multi-step process. So the main 2 steps are to complete everything that PharmCAS needs to do that verification process, and then to complete all the rest of the application materials that are needed for a complete application. So for PharmCAS to verify your application, you need to submit your PharmCAS application, and this does include our supplemental application, which is integrated into PharmCAS. You have to pay the PharmCAS application fee, which will depend on the number of schools that you're applying to, and they have to receive all of your official transcripts. Those materials are what will start the verification process of your application, and we don't actually receive your application until PharmCAS has verified it. The other materials that need to be submitted for a complete application are the $75 University of Minnesota application processing fee, your official PCAT scores, which again get sent directly to PharmCAS, your official TOEFL scores if English is not your native language, and your letters of recommendation. I'll give you a couple of tips about the PharmCAS application. It can be a little bit confusing. The most important thing is to complete all sections, which might seem like it goes without saying, but every year we do see people who leave sections of the application blank by accident. And it's really important to complete all of the sections so that the admissions committee has all of your information and your experiences when they're evaluating your application. We do advise there is a section called Experiences that will ask you for a number of pieces of information about your volunteer and work experiences, and that can be a little bit tricky to create from scratch later if you haven't been keeping track of your experiences. So we recommend that you keep track of all of the different activities that you participate in, including your start and end dates, whatever was required for that position, and then the average hours that you completed. We do advise that you plan ahead. It's not an application that most people complete in one sitting. A lot of people will work on it over the course of a few weeks in multiple sessions. And then we strongly recommend that you use your resources, especially for the essays that are part of the PharmCAS application, your career services office or your writing center at whatever school you're taking your prerequisites, or even your alma mater if you already graduated with a bachelor's degree. They can help you, especially with preparing those essays. A few notes for anyone who might be an applicant coming to us from another country or whose native language is not English. A course-by-course foreign transcript evaluation from WES, World Education Services, is required for all Classes taken outside of the United States that are not on a U.S. transcript. So usually if you do a study abroad through a U.S. institution, that coursework will show up on your U.S. transcript. So usually this isn't required for study abroad. It would be required for someone who was actually enrolled at a foreign institution taking classes there. This is required even if you're not using the classes to fulfill prerequisites, or even if it doesn't seem like it's related to pharmacy, because we require all of our applicants to submit all of their academic information for consideration in the application. We also have a requirement of the TOEFL for anyone whose first language is not English. There are some exceptions for applicants who have taken enough coursework in the United States to waive this requirement, but we recommend, because it can be a little bit confusing to determine if you meet this waiver requirement or not, that you email us at pharmacy@umn.edu with your information about where you've been attending classes, and we can help you to determine if you have a waiver for the TOEFL exam. Next, I'll talk about our deadlines. We have two important deadlines to take in mind, and each of them actually is a pair of deadlines. So first, we do have admissions scholarships that we offer to applicants who are admitted to the program. And to be considered for those scholarships, you need to meet our priority scholarship deadlines. It's a two-part deadline that correlates to the two parts of the application process I mentioned earlier. So for fall 2019 priority scholarship consideration, by November 1st, you need to submit the PharmCAS application, PharmCAS application fee, and have all of your official transcripts received by PharmCAS. And then you have until December 1st to turn in all of the remaining materials, like your $75 University of Minnesota application fee, your official PCAT scores, your TOEFL scores if they're required, and your letters of recommendation. Then the final deadline for being considered for fall 2019 admission is the same structure, where there are two deadlines, one for PharmCAS materials and one for all of the other materials. So February 1st is the deadline for the PharmCAS application fee and official transcripts, and then March 1st is the final deadline for all of the other application materials. And that is the final set of deadlines to be considered for fall 2019 admission. We operate on a rolling admissions process. So what that means is that we will review applications continuously throughout the whole entire admissions cycle until the final deadline, and we will send admissions decisions throughout the cycle. We do advise that you complete your application early. It is possible that towards the end of the cycle, seats in the class can become limited or can even fill. So it's in your best interest to apply early in the cycle. And then the process for those who are offered admission is that we allow you to hold a seat in our program until March 1st. And then on March 1st, a $500 tuition deposit is required. And the idea is that at that point, you are holding only one seat in a pharmacy school in the country. We feel very strongly that applicants should have the time to consider all of the different programs that they're applying for. So that is why we allow you to hold a seat until March 1st at no cost. But it's really important that you know the requirements for all of the schools that you're applying to, because this in particular could look different from one school to the next. Next, we'll move into how to be a competitive applicant based on our application process. So we have several selection criteria that are categorized into three areas: your academics, your experiences, and your skills and attributes. Our admissions committee uses a holistic application review, which basically means that there are no formulas, there are no automatic decisions that are made based on things like your grades or your PCAT scores. The admissions committee will look at all of the different pieces of your application in these three categories, and that is what they will use to make a decision on your application. So jumping into these in a little bit more detail, your academic achievements will be evaluated using primarily, you'll submit your transcripts to PharmCAS, and you'll also enter in each course that you've taken into an electronic transcript, and you'll have your official PCAT scores sent to PharmCAS. And the admissions committee, as they look through these materials, they'll look at your GPA, not just in terms of your overall cumulative GPA, but actually PharmCAS provides us with various breakdowns of your GPA, so we can see how your GPA has looked over time. whether it has been on an upward or a downward trend. We can see your GPA in specific types of classes, like we can calculate a science GPA, or we can even calculate a specific chemistry or biology GPA. So overall, they'll be looking at your GPA in a number of different ways. And then they'll look at your PCAT score, which does include the sub-scores for the different sections of the exam. We do accept multiple attempts of the PCAT, and if you take it more than once, we will get all of your scores. And again, the admissions committee will have access to the sub-scores for each exam as well as the composite. The committee will also take a look at your course selection. They'll take a look at the rigor of the courses that you've been taking, whether you've been taking upper level classes, how you've been doing in those classes. They'll look at your performance specifically in our prerequisite courses, since those are particularly helpful for determining how a student might do in our program. They will look at your course load, so whether you've been taking classes full-time or part-time, as well as what other types of things you are involved in at the time that you took the courses. We do officially prefer a bachelor's degree, but it is not required for admission to our program. About 90% of our applicants do enter with a bachelor's degree, but technically it is possible to be admitted to our program without a bachelor's degree. But you would need to have at a minimum the prerequisite courses completed, and to be a competitive applicant, most applicants have more than just the bare minimum prerequisite courses, but they would also have challenged themselves in taking some other upper level classes or classes that maybe are of particular interest or relate to their career goals. Here are some academic statistics for the fall 2018 incoming class. The average science GPA, as I mentioned, PharmCast will let us calculate various GPAs. So the average science GPA for the incoming class is a 3.26, and the average overall cumulative GPA is a 3.43. The average PCAT score is 75th percentile, and as I mentioned, 90% of incoming students have a bachelor's degree. We don't have any specific requirements about what you need to major in, though we do find that it's most common for our students to do majors that correlate very closely with our prerequisite requirements. So the most common majors for students entering our program are biology, biochemistry, and chemistry. Next, I'll talk about the experiences category of the selection criteria. So here the admissions committee will be looking at your work experience, your community service and volunteer experience, and any leadership experiences that you've had. For work experience, we don't require that you have pharmacy or healthcare experience, but of course it is beneficial not just to the review of your application, but also for your own exploration of pharmacy and healthcare as a potential career path for you. And this can help you throughout your application in things like your essays, and as well as in your interview. The average admitted applicant has about 2 years of paid pharmacy or healthcare experience, and that can be full or part-time. In fact, in most cases, it's typically part-time. But again, that's not a requirement for the application. So if you've not been able to gain work experience in a pharmacy setting, that's not a requirement to be admitted to the program. We also look at your community service and volunteer experience and the types of things that the admissions committee looks for here. They particularly like to see it if you have a long-term commitment to a cause versus short-term experiences or several one-time experiences. So if there's a way for you to get involved with an ongoing organization or volunteer experience that you care about, that longevity of your experience is viewed very positively by the admissions committee. They also tend to favor activities that focus on helping people and creating positive change in your communities. I'll mention here again that it does not have to be healthcare related, the community service or volunteer work that you do. Of course, that is what a lot of our applicants are naturally interested in since they're pursuing a career in healthcare. But we are mainly concerned about you showing some sort of commitment to a cause that you care about and that you're focused on helping your community. The committee will also look at your leadership experience, which can be positional or non-positional. So an example of positional leadership would be if you're the president of the pre-pharmacy club at your college or university. A non-positional example would be a time that you stepped up and provide leadership in a group setting, even though it wasn't officially your position or your title that you did that to fulfill. They'll look for leadership experiences all through the different types of experiences that you've had. So your leadership experience could be demonstrated through work. It could be demonstrated through your student organizations, through your volunteerism. It could be demonstrated in school, in classes, in lab. So there are a variety of different places that you can gain leadership experiences, and you'll want to make sure that you articulate these through your application, either in your essays or in your admissions interview. Next, the committee is going to look at various skills and attributes that students might bring into the program. They will evaluate your communication skills, and this includes both your oral and your written communication skills. The oral communication skills are evaluated primarily through the interview, and the written communication skills are evaluated primarily through essays. They will look at your understanding of the profession of pharmacy, as well as your motivation or your reasons for entering pharmacy as a career choice. They will look at unique factors that you would bring to the program that contribute to the diversity of our student body, and they'll look at your desire and potential to affect positive change. The way that we evaluate these criteria are through all the different sections of the application that the committee has access to. So I mentioned earlier that the committee will review your transcripts and all of the different PharmCast GPA reports that we have access to, and they'll review your PCAT scores. They'll also review your PharmCast personal statement, and this is a really big space where they will look at your understanding and motivation for pharmacy, because the PharmCast personal statement prompt essentially asks you why pharmacy and what makes you a qualified applicant. So this is also another place that you can highlight some of the skills and experiences that you've gained. The University of Minnesota has supplemental essays. Once you in PharmCast check the box that the University of Minnesota is a program you are applying to, it will create a section called Program Materials, and this is where you will find our supplemental essays as well as some additional questions to answer for our application. The supplemental essays are a little bit more specific to different areas that the admissions committee will be evaluating. So for example, for your volunteerism or your community service, that contribution to creating a better community, there's an essay that will ask you about the most meaningful contribution that you've made and why it was meaningful for you. There's also an essay that asks you about your career goals and what you're hoping to do with your PharmD degree. So those supplemental essays basically give you the opportunity to shed a little bit more light on some of those areas that the admissions committee will be evaluating. There are also evaluations or letters of recommendation as part of the application process. So this is, we require 3, but we accept 4. And this is basically, it's a 2-part process for your evaluators where they'll fill out a rating for you for several different criteria, and then they'll also submit a letter of recommendation. And then the admissions interview is the other area that the admissions committee will evaluate a number of these skills and experiences. Next, I'll move a little bit more into depth in some of these areas of the application, as well as providing some tips on how you can really display your skills and your strengths in the application. So as I mentioned, the PharmCast personal statement will ask you why pharmacy and what makes you an excellent applicant for the program. I do want to highlight that it is a 2-part essay, and you need to make sure that you answer both of those questions. There are times that we see applicants who focus really heavily on why they want a pharmacy degree, but maybe not so heavily on what makes them an excellent applicant, or vice versa. So just make sure that's a common pitfall with the personal statement, is focusing on only one question and not the other. The personal statement will go to every pharmacy school that you apply to through PharmCast, so this should not be specific to the University of Minnesota. This is really more about you and the career that you've chosen versus your interest in a specific pharmacy program. Then, as I mentioned, the University of Minnesota has some supplemental essays. Those can be school-specific, and they will only be accessed by the University of Minnesota. So this is the place where you might talk about how your skills and experiences and your interests are a good fit with our program specifically. Some advice for the essays. I mentioned this earlier, but make sure that you utilize your resources. Wherever you're taking your prerequisite classes or wherever you are completing or have completed a bachelor's degree, there is usually some kind of office on campus, whether it's a writing center or a career services department or your advisor, but usually there will be resources that are available to help you with your essays. And they can review them with you and give you some advice and tips, not just on editing, but also on making sure that you present yourself as well as you possibly can. You want to be really, really careful that you edit and proofread your essays. You do not want there to be a single typo or error or anything else that the admissions committee can find in your essays. And I'll mention too, make sure that you treat the supplemental essays as seriously as the personal statement. We will sometimes see that applicants have clearly spent a great deal of time and energy on their personal statement, and then they use a less formal or a little bit more casual style with their supplemental essays. All of them are important essays that will be reviewed together, so you want to make sure that you spend as much time and effort on the supplemental essays as you do the personal statement. This one might seem obvious, but I always advise that you make sure you've actually answered the question. Friends and family are a great resource with this. They don't need to know about pharmacy. They don't need to be an excellent writer. But in a piece of advice that I received in grad school from a faculty member was that you should have someone read your essay without telling them what the question is. And if they know what the question was at the end of your essay, that means you've answered it. If they read your essay and they're not really sure what the prompt for the essay was, that maybe is a sign that you need to go back and make your essay a little bit more focused to ensure that you're actually answering the full prompt for the essay. Next, I'll move on to talk about the evaluations or the letters of recommendation. So as I mentioned, we require 3 letters of recommendation, but we will accept a 4th if you'd like to have a 4th letter submitted. We don't have any specific requirements, like some schools will say you have to have at least 1 from a professor, at least 1 from a supervisor. We are not that specific about our requirements. Other than to say that we'd like to see a variety of sources. So you really want to make sure that you give us a good complement of recommenders. So a college professor, a work supervisor, someone from a place that you've been volunteering long term. Maybe if you worked in a lab, you could have your research supervisor write a letter. The main thing is that you want there to be some variety. You want to choose people who know you well. So I will sometimes be asked, is it more important that I choose someone who's like a really high status person, or is it more important that it's somebody who knows me really well? And for us, at least at the University of Minnesota, it's more important that they know you well. We would rather see a letter from a graduate student TA that you worked with really closely throughout a couple of courses than just picking someone who maybe has the highest level position or the highest status. We also do not accept letters that are personal or character references. So you want to make sure that you choose recommenders that are based on a professional or an academic relationship. So we generally do not accept letters if they're from family, friends, clergy, with the exception of if you've been working, say you've been a Sunday school teacher on a long-term basis and the clergy person knows you in that capacity, that would be acceptable. But generally it should be a professional or an academic reference versus a personal or a character reference. I'll mention one other thing with the letters of recommendation. The way the PharmCast system works is that you will enter the contact information for your recommenders into the PharmCast application system, and then it will send them an email that prompts them to go into the secure system and fill out the evaluation. I always advise that you talk with your recommenders first. You always want to make sure that you have permission for the people that you're listing as recommenders. And ideally, you don't simply ask them, will you be a recommender, but you have a conversation with them about your career goals and your interests and why you're asking them, what you think that they could add to your application. That email that the system sends to them will also allow you to provide them with a deadline, which I usually recommend that you slightly pad. So you want to maybe give them a couple weeks more than you actually, than the actual final date that they can submit your materials. And you want to make sure that you give your recommenders ample time to submit the evaluations. You want to be professional throughout this process, so you should not ask someone to be a recommendation and then give them, just a couple of days to do it. You'll want to make sure that you give them adequate time to prepare you a really strong recommendation. Next, I'll talk about our diversity factors that we consider in the application process. So I mentioned earlier that we consider factors that would contribute to the diversity of our student body. We have a specific supplemental essay that we use to evaluate this. So you're actually given the opportunity to tell us what it is that you feel is unique about your background that would contribute not just to the student body, but also to the profession of pharmacy. We use a pretty broad definition of diversity, so while it includes things like race and ethnicity, it also includes things like unique experiences. So for example, we've had applicants in the program from all sorts of different backgrounds. We've had some career changers who have worked in really diverse career fields that weren't just necessarily a straight track right into pharmacy. So we'll look at the uniqueness of your different experiences. You might bring diversity through your academic background. So for example, if you are doing a major that's not one of the most common majors for students entering our program, or if you've done something really interesting with your academics, like a study abroad trip, for example. As I mentioned, we'll look at race and ethnicity, and specifically there, we're looking at populations that have been historically represented in healthcare. Historically underrepresented in healthcare. We'll look at your geographic background. So as you might imagine, being a public university in the state of Minnesota, we do have a good number of applicants from Minnesota. So we will also look at applicants who come from different geographic backgrounds so that they can add some diversity to our class. We'll look at whether you're a first-generation college student, which means the first person in your family to go to college. And then we'll also look at your whether you have ability to speak multiple languages. So again, you are provided the opportunity in this supplemental essay to tell us what makes you unique. This is an essay that can be a little bit nerve-wracking for some applicants. Sometimes it's hard to think about what is unique about you. So we are available to answer questions for you about more statistics about our student body so that you can determine what sorts of things about your background might be unique to our student body. And then again, using your resources like a career services office or a writing center can really help you to figure out what sorts of things you might talk about in this essay. Next, I'll talk about the on-campus interview. So we have an interview process that is, it's a pretty standard interview. So we don't ask any trick questions. We use what you might think of automatically when you think about an interview, where it's one-on-one, sitting with someone, talking with them, answering their questions, and it also provides you an opportunity to ask them questions. We use behavioral or situational style interview questions, and those are the questions that are generally tell me about a time when or what would you do if questions. So these are questions that either ask you for examples of experiences that you've had that might demonstrate specific types of skills or attributes, or they might be a hypothetical situation that would ask you what sort of thought process you would have and what you would do in that situation. For those types of interview questions, the biggest piece of advice I can give is to make sure that you are prepared with a menu of examples to choose from. So before your interview, it's a good idea to think about a number of different examples from whether it's work settings, whether it's from school, whether it's from volunteering, but just think about different examples from those experiences you've had that you think showcase a variety of different skills or experiences. And then when you're asked an interview question that asks you, tell me about a time when, you have already thought through some of those examples or stories that you can tell in advance, and then you're thinking about which one best fits the question instead of trying to come up with a story completely from scratch. It also helps to actually tell those stories out loud so that you get experience articulating the experience and kind of, seeing if there are times that you fumble over your words or that you're not quite sure how to phrase things. In our interview, you'll definitely want to be ready to articulate what you know about the profession of pharmacy. There will definitely be times in the interview that you're asked about the role of pharmacy and how it fits into the larger scheme of healthcare. This is also a really big place for you to tell us why you want to be a pharmacist. This, along with your essays, is really your chance to let us know why you've selected pharmacy as a career. And with this, I'll go on to say, that you want to make sure that your answers to these questions in the essays in the interview do specifically answer why you want to be a pharmacist versus any other healthcare career. There are times that the answers people provide to this are just a little bit generic, or maybe could be applied to a lot of different fields in healthcare. So you want to make sure that you do a good job of articulating why it is that you've narrowed things down to pharmacy specifically instead of some other healthcare career. You'll also, in the interview, this will be your chance to let us know why the University of Minnesota is a good fit for your career path. So you'll want to make sure that you've done your homework on our PharmD program, our curriculum, and the opportunities that we have available here. Again, I'm a little bit of a broken record here, but I'd like to highlight that you should use your resources. Those offices I mentioned earlier that can help you with your essays can usually also help you with interview support. Specifically, this type of assistance is usually offered through a career services office, and they might have opportunities where you can do mock interviews. They might have written materials that you can read through, and then we actually also have some resources available on our website that can help you with your interview preparation. Again, I'll really highlight that as uncomfortable as it might feel, practicing out loud is one of the biggest things that people can do to prepare for their interview. All right, at this time, I'm going to turn it over for questions. So if you haven't noticed yet, there is a section in the YouTube chat where you can submit questions, and I will be reading out those questions and responding to them. And just so you know, there is a little bit of a time lag with the presentation, so if there is a pause, I'm just waiting for a question to come in, and I will announce when the presentation is concluding. We're not seeing any questions yet, so we'll just give it one more minute in case anybody would like to submit a question. In the meantime, I will mention that this session has been recorded and we will send it out via email as long as you were registered in advance and we have your contact information. All right, seeing that there are no questions in the chat, we will conclude the session, and we thank you for joining us today. And you can see my email address on the screen here if you do think of any questions that you'd like to ask after the session. Thank you.